This is the YOB ConvoCast, one-on-one conversations with your other brother's authors, community members, supporters, and friends.
What's up, friends, and welcome back to the YOB ConvoCast Enneagram edition, as we are starting to build some traction. We're starting to get some mileage out of this series as we continue our dial around the Enneagram. We're entering a fun new frontier, let's say. It's very fun. It's very emotional. So everybody strap in. We've got an emotional few episodes ahead as we enter into the heart triad. These are the biggest hearted people. Not that anyone outside of the heart triad is heartless, but these are especially beautiful people because they just are. They're amazing. And today we're kicking off the heart triad, the 2s, 3s, and 4s with an Enneagram 2. And he's somebody who's been in our community for a good while now. He's been involved for a good while. And I'm so glad. It's always fun. Just on the heels of introducing Jesse in our last episode as a 1. Today we get to introduce someone else to the greater listening audience. And he identifies as a 2. And his name is Wes. What's up, Wes?
I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here, Tom. It's great.
It's so great. I'm excited too. Wes, how long have you been a part of YOB now? Has it been a few years, a couple years?
I hate when people ask me that question because I can never remember.
Yeah, I should have asked you for your anniversary date.
I know. But if my memory serves me correctly, because a lot has happened since then, but I discovered YOB probably in either late 2017 or early 2018. And I had just been a lurker on the YOBolog for the longest time and just reading blog posts. And it was just incredible to me how much I resonated with so many thoughtful comments there on the YOB blog. And it was just a wonderful realization. Wow, there's other people out there that are just like me. And so after lurking for a good long while, I finally decided to join Patreon. And I said, this is something I can definitely devote part of my life to. This is something special. And so I've been part of this amazing community ever since then. And I've never looked back.
You've never looked back. You were forbidden from looking back.
Exactly.
I'm so glad. We always love it when our lurkers come out. Hashtag lurker no longer. That's what we like to say around here. And now you're getting to share on a podcast production. Isn't that amazing that you get to share some of yourself on a very special Enneagram edition of the ConvoCast, no less?
I never thought I'd be on a podcast like this, much less a podcast at all. So this is groundbreaking for me, definitely.
First podcast, huh? Yeah, it's fun. It's fun times. Well, let's not waste too much time, Wes, because like I predicted in our last episode, we got so much feedback because there's so many 2s in our community, and the nature of a 2, the giver, the helper, they want to contribute, they want to matter, they want to do something. And so by far the most feedback we've gotten out of any of our episodes we've done so far. I'm curious if that number will hold up, something like 6 or 7 people reaching out in the last week or two of us asking for feedback. So we'll see if the 2s hold the championship as far as people contributing by the time we get all the way around the end of the Enneagram. So that's my prediction anyway, is that 2s will win that competition, but we'll see.
Hey, if anyone's going to come out of the woodwork, it's going to be 2s. We're like termites. You can never really truly get rid of us. You just have to keep feeding us.
The only other one that I think could challenge the 2 is the 4, but we have a lot of 4s in our community, but it could go either way. Either the 4s are so excited to share their unique perspective, or they're going to retreat within themselves and they're not going to contribute because that's beneath them. So we'll see what happens when we get to 4 in just a couple weeks. But before we get started, anything about yourself to give the listeners, because you've been involved in our community for, just like you said, for a couple of years now. For people that don't know who you are, what makes you Wes? Like, other than your Two-ness, which we'll have the whole hour ahead to talk about. What else makes up the man before me that is Wes?
Well, I always start off by telling people who are meeting me for the first time, I am definitely a storyteller at heart. I always say that Walt Disney is one of my biggest inspirations ever. Um, and I just enjoy what happens in a person's heart when a good story is told. And so I like to devote a lot of my life to just making sure that spaces for those stories are provided to be told. But right now, as a way to pay my bills, I am a high school teacher. I'm currently teaching Algebra 2, and so putting those rare math skills to use. And since it obviously pays the most out of all the other subjects, the extra stipend is nothing to shake a stick at either. And so I've been doing that for the past 3 years, all while living here in what we call the beautiful mountain of Texas, because Beaumont
Singular.
literally means beautiful mountain. And it is the biggest oxymoron because it is one of the flattest places in the southern United States, right here on the Gulf Coast.
Wow. You know how I love in my podcast intros to give the geographic location a fun nickname. So from the beautiful mountain of Texas, that's very poetic. I like that.
Yes. So I've just been teaching the past 3 years on top of staying involved in my local community theater. I am a huge theater nerd, have been ever since high school. And we just wrapped up our musical production of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the classic 1968 film starring Dick Van Dyke and Sally Ann Howes. And I got the pleasure of portraying Baron Bombburst. And anyone who knows this movie knows how over the top and high energy and, prone to tantrums he is. So he is pretty much every character trait in me personified to the extreme. And so I enjoyed playing him so very much. So that's how I spend my extra time outside of school, as well as staying involved with my local church here in Beaumont. I'm a regular worship leader for them, and so I always say the worship leaders have the best seat in the house up there from the pulpit. So. And since we all sing a cappella in 4-part harmony, I get the pleasure of having all those voices directed right at me. So that is definitely the highlight of my Sundays.
Wow, that's such a great summation of everything. And you represent so much in our community. A love for theater, that's definitely present in our community. And educators, I think, I haven't crunched the numbers, but I think educators are the most common profession that I have found in our community. Between that and like programmers or engineer, like there's something going on in that world as well, in our community. So I'm hoping that, people will be able to resonate with some of your story and from where you're coming from, just based on what you just shared. We're going to talk about being an Enneagram 2 today. And right off the bat, as always, I want to preface this conversation by saying the Enneagram is a wonderful tool. It is one of many in the toolbox that we like to dive into for personal growth, for self-awareness, for building empathy. These are all amazing byproducts that I have found through studying the Enneagram and learning about it and ultimately sharing stories. I love how you touched on just your love for story, and obviously, hopefully, that's something that drew you to our community in the first place. Is that's something that we really value here, and so that's just an awesome opportunity through this Enneagram ConvoCast series to share stories just through another lens. And I find it super illuminating, super fascinating to process it through the lens of sexuality and masculinity. It's been so fun to see how similar we all are, but how we all approach different things slightly differently. And so I'm excited to learn. My goal through all of these episodes is to shut up as much as possible and listen to either my guests or the feedback that we get, because as I mentioned at the top, we got a lot of feedback. So we're going to try to read as much of it as possible. Thank you, YOBers, for taking the time. Not only did we get a lot of feedback from numbers of people, but also the longest feedback, like people really taking their time to write a story. And so, so I'm going to read as much as I can as time allows, but that is coming in this episode on the Enneagram 2. Information from this episode comes from truity.com, where you can take their Enneagram assessment. The link will be in the show notes. And then we also borrowed some information from enneagramgift.com about stress and security. So, the giving aspect of this type immediately brings to mind, I'm smiling so wide right now because it brings to mind, I don't know if you were there for this, if you witnessed it, but we had a retreat last year, which you attended, and we were at a camp, and when we woke up one morning, it had either rained the night before or it was just super dewy out or something, but like all the chairs that we ate at outside were all soaked. They were all wet. And so I went to the camp staff and I was like, do you have any towels or rags or things that we can use to dry off all of the chairs that are outside? And so they brought me like a big bucket of towels. And somebody, I forget who it was, but somebody made the joke, we need an Enneagram 2 to help. And I didn't even have to turn around. Like as soon as I looked towards the voice, there was already a beloved 2 in our midst, reaching for the bucket, reaching for the rags and saying, I'm already on it. And he was starting to wipe everything. And I was just like, this is amazing because this is just how he's naturally wired, that he just wants to help. He just wants to give. And obviously we had other people helping. We didn't just let him be the only person to clean, but that just to me was such a snapshot of that giver moniker, because he was like springing into action, was looking for that opportunity to contribute, and he did. And so that's just the beautiful part about being a 2. And I'm so grateful for all the 2s in our community. There's quite a plethora. I wanted to read the stats for those that forgot, but in Truity's study, because Truity has done a study on 54,000 people who come to their site and fill out surveys and things. And that's been interesting to kind of get sort of a framework for how many of them are out there in the world, in the universe. And so in their study of 54,000 respondents, type 2s were found to make up approximately 11% of the population. What's fascinating is they broke it down into male and female, and women are more likely to be type 2s, with 15% being women and just 7% being men, which tracks for me. Wow. That makes sense. I think not to like say that 2s are effeminate. That is not what I'm saying, but it typically brings to mind the like Martha from the Bible, or Exactly. It's like the good housewife who will drop everything she's doing and make sure everyone else is fed, like that common stereotype. Like they'll make sure her husband or her children are fed or the house is clean before she takes care of herself. And there's some truth to that. That's not to say all housewives, especially all Christian housewives, are 2s, but that is a stereotype, and so there's some truth in that for some housewives, I'm sure. But that's just really interesting that it tilts more female in the Truity study. And then in our community, going back to our Enneagram YOBcast, it was revealed that it's either the number 1 most represented or the number 2 most represented type in our community. Something like 22 to 23% of people who have responded on Facebook and Discord identify as a 2, which is very high. So it seems to be much higher than the general population and much, much higher than the general male population is what I've found, which is interesting. I find that among the most interesting, if not the most interesting stat in all of the stats that I'm reading off for these nine types.
It is very interesting, especially considering we have a lot of yobbers, myself included, that have mentioned being able to resonate and connect with the females in their life as opposed to the males. They just had a lot more female influencers throughout adolescence and their young adulthood. And they were just able to meet the needs of their relationships with the females in their lives much more quickly and in a much more meaningful way than they were the males. So I think there's definitely a correlation there. I remember just always hanging out with the girls throughout elementary and middle school. I maybe had 1 or 2, guys that I would talk to every once in a while, but mostly it was, sitting at the lunch table, hey, trade you this for this. It wasn't anything meaningful, but I could have meaningful conversations with the girls. So yes, I can see the correlation there easily.
Yeah, a lot of similar wirings just in those personalities. Here's what a two are. I know we haven't actually defined it yet, but here's how Truity defines the twos. And I'll read the motivations of the two. And then Wes, you can chime in with how that fits with you or how that squares with your sexuality, with your gender identity, with how you connect with other men. Twos are defined by their desire to belong and to be loved by others. They are helpful, nurturing, and caring towards others. They are eager to involve themselves in others' lives. I hear a theme. There's a lot of others here. Mm-hmm. Twos rarely say no when others ask them for help and want to prove value to others by always being there for them. The two's core motivation is to feel loved and appreciated, which motivates them to express love toward others in their words and their actions. Does that sound pretty accurate to you? Does it sound familiar?
All of the above. But I think more so than being loved and appreciated, which is still super important to us, we really want to feel like we belong somewhere. And depending on our instinct, I know we're not going in depth into the instincts today, but if we don't feel we belong with a particular group or in a particular setting, I've noticed this trend among us twos in my life specifically. Either one, I'm not going to invest in those relationships and just keep things at a either acquaintance or professional level, depending on the context. Or two, I'm going to be purposely pushy in an attempt to belong there. And so that's why I would say that if we don't feel we belong, that's going to hit us straight in the heart. Although being loved and appreciated is certainly wrapped into there.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that sense of belonging, because I know, as is the case with all of these conversations we're having, it's not like you only have to be a two to have this strong desire to belong, but it is helpful to illuminate that aspect of being a two in particular. That is a very important aspect of finding a community, of finding a place to contribute and to give, to feel that sense of belonging in return. Like that's super, super interesting to hear and connect with my own story as someone who isn't a two. Let me read some feedback, because like I said, we've got a lot. And so if I say anything, if I read a story that triggers a thought or an amen, you can feel free to chime in with that, Wes. But here's what one person had to say about motivations. I only discovered the Enneagram 2 years ago, and it blew my mind. At first, I completely disagreed with the core motivator that I give love in order to receive love. My entire life has been focused on loving and providing for others' needs in a true, deep, and connected way. I saw this in school, in theater, in marriage, and in friendships. The more a person is in need, the more I show up. And by showing up, I thought I was filling my cup. I truly didn't believe I was craving something in return. Self-care was extremely rare for the last 4 decades of my life. I believed that by caring for others and having very little boundaries, that I was caring for self. For many years, there was one part of my cup that was never filled, being loved and known by a man. And then a few years ago, it happened. Then it was lost. I've since grown to know that my validation and worth does not need to come from a man loving me, but it's a weekly battle to stand firm in that when I find myself missing that deep connection and love. You see what I was saying at the top about people really dove deep? That's no shade to the other types who have contributed feedback in previous episodes, but this is the foreshadowing to come, because all the comments were like that. They were just like super profound. I'm sure he could probably just write a blog about his experience with loving, being a two and loving a man, or wanting the love of a man, which I think is a unique aspect of our conversation for our community.
We love laying it all out there, Tom. I mean, we're not going to beat around the bush. We're not going to cut corners. Anything we do is done full blast, and there's no way to dial it down. So I completely resonate with a lot of what this Yobber said, especially the love from another man being found and then being lost. But I went through the exact same thing just a couple of years ago with my former best friend. It is a story that is central to the development of my sexuality and my understanding of intimate male friendship and how it works. But long story short, another two enters his life. This two becomes his fiance, and then finally his wife. And she happens to be very unhealthy and becomes very demanding, controlling, and manipulative of his time and his resources. And eventually convinces him that I am the problem in our friend circle, and I could tell there was just so much jealousy there, and she just didn't want me taking up any of his time. In her mind, the idea of marriage meant that he was had to take care of every single last one of her needs first before he could even touch his other relationships. And I was trying to convince her that is clearly not what Scripture teaches at all, and that is very not healthy for him, and that is idolatry at him. So, but she ended up convincing him that she was right, and he, another long story short, he uninvited me from his wedding over text message. I was supposed to be one of his groomsmen. So I had to experience losing the most intimate friend I had ever had in my life, who was a man, promptly throw me in the ditch. In one text message, he had successfully communicated to me that I was the Holy Trinity, unloved, unvalued, and didn't belong. And so a two has no option when that happens other than a downward spiral. And that's exactly what happened. I later came to terms with my idolatry towards him, and I repented of that, and I made it right. And I eventually did call him and set that straight with him a year after that happened. But he still made it clear that, and he too confessed to his part in everything that happened, and asked for my forgiveness for that. But he still made it clear that he was not going to have time to devote to our friendship anymore. And so I could tell that he was still brainwashed, unfortunately. So I just had to let him go. And so, yes, that is the deepest pain that a type 2 can feel, especially when it's only one person that you feel like you've been that intimate with, like it was in my case.
Yeah, man, thanks for sharing that. And I'm sure the loss of friendship in our community is a very common theme. And so I hope you know that, I don't know if you've heard, Wes, but you were not alone. And so thank you for sharing that. And just, I know, especially for a two, because as I was joking about it, but it's just so true. It's wired into the two that others are such a focus. That's not to say the other 8 types don't care about other people, but I've noticed from the twos in my life, and I've had a good number of them. Shout out to all you lovely people who are listening. There's a lot of you. They care a lot, and it can be a beautiful thing, and it can also be, I imagine, a devastating thing when it's not reciprocated or when it's lost in situations like that. So I appreciate the vulnerability, and I know there are a lot of people out there resonating with that unfortunate part of life with losing friends. Someone else wanted to get to some other ones. Someone else said this: I think for me, I would add needed to my core motivators. Feeling as though I'm a vital part of a group or friendship goes a long way towards helping me to feel loved. But I would say that the level of love and appreciation I'm receiving from others is the major factor in my decision-making processes. I've stayed at the same church, job, apartment, and city for years because of the relationships that I have there. Even when I feel like moving on to something else, I put other people's needs and feelings before my own, which isn't all bad. I tend to avoid and run from problems. So my two side keeps me from giving up when I should really be digging in. And we'll dive more into security, spoiler alert, when we get there in a half hour or so. But that is the essence of a 2 in security, is learning that self-care is not a bad thing, and having needs and making decisions for yourself is a good thing.
Absolutely. It can get to a point where you just forget to do the basic self-care routines for yourself, just all in an attempt to get that love and affection aimed back at you. And I know in my life, it's manifested as just having a full schedule all the time. I would stay busy from dawn to dusk, trying to leave as little time, for sleep or eating or basic things like that. Well, that's kind of a lie. I always make time to eat. I love food too much. Yeah, I would just overpack my schedule to a point where I could honestly, reflecting back on it now, I wasn't able to give 100% of my full attention and full intentionality to a certain thing. It was always, 25% here, 50% here, 75% here. So, as they say down here in the South, you had your hand in too many pies. So
it's so true. Got to take time for yourself. We'll get to that in security, but nice foreshadowing. I love this comment. This one is so such a great visual, and I felt it. I truly felt this comment. This Yobber said, I love to love people. I love serving people, affirming qualities in people that maybe others don't notice, and knowing their dreams and fears. I love mentoring people and helping them work through their struggles. I don't know about most people, but I tend to prefer flesh and blood to that which I cannot see. When someone who knows me deeply simply says, I love you, and wraps me in a warm embrace, I feel like the world melts away, that I'm truly seen, known, and loved. So by extension, part of me desires this level of being loved by another man. As much as I want to rest completely in the truths of God's word to me, oftentimes I yearn much more for that flesh and blood hug and that audible I love you. I suppose the challenge for me is to accept these flesh and blood placations of my fears for what they are, blessings, yet temporary shadows of the truest love that's out there for me. A love more true and more real than anything I can see or feel or hear. You see, you guys, this is the kind of language we're getting now that we've entered into the heart triad. You don't get this with the 8 and 9 and the 1. Not that they can't love people too, but that was such a 2 comment. It was like one of the two-iest comments. I'm making up words as we go, but one of the two-iest comments I read on this entire feedback form. So thank you to that Yobber for contributing. I got wrapped up in the story.
Be still my soul.
I know,
I
right?
know this Yobber, and I just want to say I love you so much. It's just,
there's so much love in the room, you guys. Can you feel it? Can you feel it oozing out of your earbuds right now?
If not, then we're doing it wrong. I was reading a wonderful article that one of our other Yobbers posted in the Discord the other day. And the title of it was, I believe it was something along the lines of, you need more than God. And just that statement alone, without any context around it, will have others in the church yelling blasphemy. And in fact, I would label that blasphemy at one point in my life. And this article really helps get things into perspective for me, in that we as humans are very unique creatures. One, that we're the only ones called made in his image, but also because we are in a unique position where, yes, we need God's constant presence. We need his constant influence in our lives in order to make it. But we also need other people. And God cannot, in this time of post-resurrection, cannot come down again, to give us hugs or to audibly say, I love you to us. And so he gives that commission to the other people in our lives. He allows us to see Christ through the lives of other people, through the loves, through the hugs, through the I love yous, through the affirmations. And that is okay. And I was able to verbally affirm that to myself just recently. And it really did just bring me the greatest sense of freedom in my heart, that I can't just say anymore, oh, well, I have no intimate friends around me. I have no opportunities for deep relationships. I'm just going to have to keep praying and studying my Bible and, hope that that's enough. The truth is it's not. I still need the hugs. I still need the I love yous. I still need the midnight conversations under the stars. I need it all. And we are just very unique people, very unique part of creation for having those two needs that cannot be replaced by the other. And so that was just so eye-opening to me. And I really think that's what this writer is getting at here. He needs both, and we all need both.
Yeah, very well said. And twos have so much to offer, and have so much to offer, as the cliche goes, or as it goes in scripture, to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Like, there is a physical manifestation that I have witnessed and appreciated in twos in my life, dear people in my life. I want to make a segue to fears, and this was a good comment that we got from answering about motivations. He was saying that as a two, I do try to encourage others a lot with words and with touch, but at the same time, especially with the touch portion, I have to admit that it can be self-serving. And this is a great bridge to the fear of the Enneagram 2's deepest fear, which is 2's fear being alone and unloved, and they cope with this fear by taking care of others and making themselves central to other people's lives. And I'm just going to call it what it is. I'm just going to be straight and blunt with everybody. Like, I call that manipulation, like a way that you can insert yourself into somebody else's life. And touch is one way that can happen. And I've heard that story, and I've actually experienced that myself. And again, I'm not going to share my side of the story as someone who isn't a two, but I've experienced that two manipulation. And we didn't mention at the top, but the root vice, or the primary passion of the two, is pride. Which is I mean, all of the vices are not great and are not fun, but pride is such a blinding one, because I think there's a quote out there, gosh, I don't know who it is, or if it was like C.S. Lewis or who it was, but there's a quote about pride that essentially says something to the effect of that it's one of the worst sins because you don't even know you're committing it. It's like you're blind to your sense of ownership and control in whatever the situation, whatever the problem is. And so as pride maybe enters into the conversation, feel free, if stories of pride come up, or maybe you don't realize you have pride, Wes, maybe you are innocent. but in relationship with others, yeah, this is an interesting one with the biggest fear of needing to just like be central in somebody's life. Let me read this comment, and then we'll go to you, Wes. Someone said this: I think that pretty much sums it up. I struggle with depressive episodes, and the common theme in all of them is that I am alone and unloved by everyone in my life. Some of the lowest points in my life are when I felt inherently alone and unable to be loved for who I was. When I was much unhealthier emotionally in the past, that led to me being very clingy and overcommitted, as if by being constantly helpful, I could quote unquote earn love. That was why I only had female friends for a long time, because I was better able to meet their needs and help them emotionally. And so I felt closer to them than any of the men in my life, even though none of them knew and loved the real me, only the selfless and servile face that I put forward. And the thought of coming out to anyone was just unthinkable. To be rejected by my friends and family for something I couldn't change was the worst possible outcome, worse than losing my job or getting kicked out of my church. My relationship with God has also been impacted by that fear, and I constantly have to fight against the lie that he loves me only because of what I do for him. My biggest struggle isn't the fear that I'm truly saved or that I'm not a good enough person. It's the fear that God merely tolerates me rather than truly loves me. And this is really good. I mean, there's a lot in there, but something I wanted to focus on was the relationship with God, because Jesse touched on it a little bit as a one. And I think there's a little bit of a crossover there. Like, how each of the types relates with God is very fascinating to me, not only as a believer, but obviously as someone who loves the Enneagram. But this need for the one, the need to clean up and to be presentable and orderly, and particularly in the realm of sexuality, that opens up a whole can of worms. But then for the two, do you resonate with that statement that do you ever wonder if you're just tolerable in God's eyes versus just like madly in love with you that he created you and made you exactly the way that you are?
Mm. First of all, I know this Yobber too. I was just FaceTiming with him the other day, and I think I love him more. Sorry, the first Yobber. I love this one more. No, I love everyone equally. But yeah, I noticed this kind of unhealthy pride developing in me from a very, very early age. I had so much pride in the type of church that I grew up in that was just conservative and evangelical and stood its ground. And I would frequently try to engage my friends at school in theological debates. And usually it started off with something like, do you know why my church is the one doing everything the right way? Wonderful way to kick off the conversation. But I'm a fourth generation Christian. My great grandparents worshiped at the church that I was raised in. So we had deep roots there. My mom's dad was a gospel preacher for 50 years. My dad's dad was an elder for almost as long. So they knew the Bible better than anyone else I knew. And somehow that legacy, that influence, in my mind, it made me who I was. It was almost as if I could claim their accomplishments, their righteousness as my own. It was prideful. And the running narrative I had whenever someone older than me said something about, all the gays, if they ever got mentioned, I was thinking, oh, I'm a Christian in every sense of the word. That kind of thing could never happen to me. Those kind of things never happen to Christians anyway. How could it? Well, the story tells itself from there. Yes, I had to struggle so much with that idea that God only tolerates me, that he is only using me to further his kingdom, further his will, which to me sounded manipulative. And so, in my relationship with God in the past, I would say, oh, God has put this thorn in my flesh, so that means I can do whatever I want as compensation for my suffering. And that is just utter foolishness. I remember having a breakdown/breakthrough a few years ago when I was dating my girlfriend at the time. I forget now what led up to it, but I asked myself one day, I said, Wes, who ever told you that Jehovah needs you? Who taught you that? Who taught you that Jehovah God, the I Am, needs you? And to be honest, I still haven't done the internal work that would be necessary in order to find that answer. But nevertheless, when I realized that Jehovah did not need me to keep his kingdom running, and he did not need me to accomplish his will, I broke down in tears. And they were tears of both regret that I had spent most of my life believing that, but they were also tears of relief. Because even though God did not need me in his kingdom, he would still happily put me to work should I choose to abide in his kingdom. Nothing in the heavenly realm depends on me. God does not love me for the things that I can do for him. There's nothing I can do for Jehovah God. He loves me simply because he made me in his image and because he wants me in his presence forever. And I think that's something that every two has to come to terms with if they're going to move to a healthier state of mind and experience that true freedom.
Thanks for sharing that. And I hope other twos listening and non-twos for that matter, find a lot of resonance in those words. Let me read off a couple more and then we'll move on to stress and security. But a couple other aspects of the fear that I wanted to touch on. Someone said this: as a result of being a two and having these desires and fears, I know that I've really struggled with accepting a healthy outlook with a side B theology, because it feels like I'll never fulfill my desire to be truly and unconditionally loved by another. I have a deep desire to be someone's chosen number one, and I haven't really experienced that. Most of my best friends have been girls who have another girl as their best friend. I've never been able to connect with a guy in a way that makes me feel like their best friend. Without a romantic relationship, it feels like I'll never have that desire to be loved, fulfilled. So part of this journey for me has been trying to change my perception of what it looks like to be loved. Still learning. Someone else said, being a 2 almost makes me feel guilty because I can resonate with the notion that being single and living alone makes me feel more needy and more prone to inserting myself into others' lives, even if it gets to the point of being more forceful and even manipulative. I don't think that this honors God, so I do desire to find a way to initiate with others in a way that does honor the Lord and is honoring to them. And then lastly, someone said, I laughed when I first read about the 2's deepest fear. I thought, doesn't everyone fear being alone, abandoned, unneeded, and worse, unwanted? How am I any different? But boy, are we 2's different. If I sense a lack of care or abandonment from a male friend, straight or gay, I'm compelled to examine what went wrong, how I failed him, how I can make it right, and invest a ton of energy into restoring the relationship I fear I'm losing. I've noticed that I don't invest nearly that much energy in female friendships. I'm quite content letting go of the women who let go of me. It still stings, I still grieve, but not nearly as deeply or for as long. I find it fascinating that other personality types can seemingly bounce back so easily from dissolving relationships. And you shared a little bit about that earlier, so we don't need to repeat it. But I just, as I was reading, I can see out of the corner of my eye, out of my periphery, that you're just nodding your head as I read all of these comments. So I know that these elements of these stories, I feel like we could probably sit here and talk for hours, but we need to keep moving into the land of stress, which it's always interesting when all of these types move into places of stress and they adopt qualities of other types, because the move for 2 is going to 8. The challenger, which harkens back to our conversation with Matthew. The deeper we go into the series, there'll be more like noticeable, if you've been listening to all these episodes, you'll be able to make connections like, oh, so Wes kind of becomes like a negative Matthew. If we're going to start putting people in boxes, which I don't recommend putting people in boxes, but elements of the dark side of 8 is kind of where 2 goes in times of stress. And here's what EnneagramGift.com has to say about that. During periods of stress, 2s will take on qualities of type 8s. This quality will make them more demanding, manipulative, and controlling. They will begin to shift the blame for the situation to others around them. They may also go through the past and point out previous wrongs made in the past. So how does that land with you as a type 2 during your more stressful times?
I could really see how me and my friend's fiance at the time were just butting heads as 2 2s. I said 2 2. It was crazy how unhealthy she was acting, being manipulative and controlling and demanding of him. But then again, I had a lot of expectations of them too. And I expected them to subscribe to my view of friendship, bringing all the baggage that I brought to the concept. But, them two being straight as boards and, just head over heels for each other. It was easy to see how both of our unhealthiness was just causing this whole situation to boil over and cause a big grease fire.
When you have two unhealthy people, regardless of the stressful situation, it can be a grease fire. But especially, I can imagine in my head what it would look like for 2 2s who are in a stressful situation with one another, like how that could be just emotionally like a wildfire. Like a grease fire, I think, is a very visceral, like vicious metaphor. And so I appreciate your use of that. The storyteller in you is coming out very clearly. So thank you for painting that picture.
It could just be that we deep fry everything down here in Texas. That's why I thought
you already mentioned deep fried, grease fire. You mentioned pies earlier. So this is a very yummy, a very taste-worthy podcast. Let's read some comments about stress. Someone said this: I learned a lot about this tendency of being controlling of others can be harmful through a friendship I used to have with a guy a few years ago. I caused harm not only to this guy, but a number of others around him. I tried to justify it because of things that happened to me when I was younger that I felt influenced my behavior. But ultimately, I came to the realization that I am ultimately responsible for my actions and must make sure that I'm always treating others in a way that honors God. And that's a great comment because it shows the nature of stress of making excuses or looking to the past as like a reason for present behavior, but also the ownership of that, of recognizing, escaping that the pride, the vice that we've mentioned for the two is recognizing one's role in that. So I really appreciated the vulnerability in that comment of somebody who shared both aspects of this stress. Someone said this: reading one author's account of my stress path made me feel known and loved. I truly hate when I become irritable, dominating, or pass blame. The stress reactions bubble up when I feel like I've been providing for those I love the most for days or weeks on end, and they haven't taken a moment to ask how my day has been going or ask how they can help prepare dinner or something seemingly insignificant like that. To it too, these acts of love and service are huge. It says we are worth loving too, instead of endlessly giving to others like a Santa Claus of love and service 365 days a year. This is such a personal downfall for me in coming to terms with my sexuality. That is a great line. I just was like, I need to read that comment because the Santa Claus 365 days a year, what a great, I guess Santa Claus must be a 2 for him to do what he does. Bless that man.
See what else he could be.
What other type could be Santa Claus than a type 2? Yeah, that was a great line.
Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, ain't no 4 out there gonna be Santa Claus, that's for sure. I'll speak for my tribe. But feeling that love in return, feeling that reciprocated, I know that's a huge deal for 2s, and we'll get to loving a 2 at the end of our conversation, which we're getting there. But that was a great comment. And then lastly, for stress, someone said this: I feel deep stress when I have a serious conflict with a close male friend, and I'm tempted to get desperate and do whatever it takes to regain his love. Sometimes I've resorted to yelling and foul language to make him see how much he has hurt me undeservedly, to guilt him into showing me love. And that is just evil, and I fight that temptation. A more common issue with me is that under stress, I will calmly, quietly work as hard as I can, like a determined Enneagram 8, to make myself so helpful to my friend that I am indispensable, and he knows that he will never find anyone else so loyal and helpful as I am. That is actually effective, but manipulative, because I'm selfishly trying to get what I need out of a man. And that's like, it's so interesting to read all of the feedback because it keeps coming back again and again. It's so others oriented. It's interesting. Like some of our previous conversations were focusing sometimes more so on sexuality or masculinity. But the way I broke it up was sexuality, masculinity, and how you relate with other men. And I feel like the bulk of this conversation, I don't want to, if Wes, if something comes to mind about your sexuality or about masculinity that you want to chime in, feel free. But I feel like a big theme as I read all the comments is that it's so focused on relationships. And that seems to be at the heart of the 2, both in their times of stress and in their times of security, as we'll see in a second.
Exactly. If we do not have that core group of relationships that are keeping us grounded, everything else simply does not matter. We could live in the worst city in the nation. We could work the worst job you could ever imagine. But if we come home every day to people that deeply know us and deeply love us, that makes every single minute of everything else worth it. And yeah, if you mess with the people that we love, or if you hurt us that badly, our first instinct in our gut is to appear as a giant fireball in the middle of your living room, cloak, black hat, green skin, ready to off you because you stole our sister's ruby slippers. So, man, we have to.
I was trying to figure out, what image are you painting? Green skin? Like what? Oh, okay. I get it now. That was a Wizard of Oz reference.
For those who did.
Yeah. You referenced Wizard of Oz. You referenced Disney. And I had the image of like a mama bear, almost like that move to 8. This kind of sense of, I don't know, just a domineering, overprotective, presence. But a 2 insecurity, this is fun for me because you come to my side, Wes. 2's insecurity go to 4, which is the individualist or the romantic. And what that means is this: during periods of growth and security, 2's will take on qualities of 4's. This attribute will allow 2's to realize that self-care is good and not an act of selfishness. As they love themselves, they will know it is not required to pretend to love everyone around them. And I'll obviously have much more to say during the 4 episode when that rolls around, so I don't want to share here. And we're running out of time, but I just love it when 2's take time for themselves. Like, that is such a beautiful thing, because they do so much for other people, and for them to take care of themselves, to turn off their phone, or to book the massage, or to go to the spa, or to work out, or to cook a meal for themselves where no one else is attending. Like, I think that's just a beautiful thing when a 2 is in that space.
It is, although part of me despises going out to a restaurant and getting a table all by myself. It's just, that will never not be awkward to me. But
see, I love that. Embrace the solitude, embrace being by yourself. Like, that's not necessarily easy for me, but I recognize it probably comes easier to someone like me especially compared to someone like you, or compared to other 2's. So important. It's important to have time to yourself, and that's definitely a point of growth for you guys.
I really resonate with what that author said, that state of mind that says I have to pretend that I love everyone around me, even though I can't see our relationship growing into what I would want it to be. I see this dynamic happening with my parents, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. They all live here in the beautiful mountain of Texas with me. But I wouldn't say that I don't love them. I definitely do, because they have been a constant presence for the entirety of my life. But we haven't been as involved, quote unquote, in each other's lives at the level that would register in my mind as being fully known and fully loved. If that makes sense. They all just kind of, go, they're all doing their own thing. They all have their own little families to take care of. Being fully known and fully loved, that title's reserved to those select few that I've come out to, if we're talking about, how our sexuality works with this, which unsurprisingly is mostly friends who were all straight. But once they were able to affirm my struggle and commend me, for keeping my allegiance to God and to his commands for my life, that's when I was able to manifest the full, authentic Wes with them. But I know the truth of the matter is, if someone's opinion of me as a result of my sexuality is negative, I should not let that inhibit my growth as a person, as a Christian, as a son, as a friend. And so I've just been able to establish healthier boundaries for myself ever since I realized that.
I imagine you mentioned coming out. Like, I think we all need in our lives, we need somebody to talk to, even if it is just a therapist or a pastor or somebody. Hopefully we have friends or family in our lives that we can talk about this aspect of ourselves. But I imagine that for the 2, and probably for 3's and 4's and other types, that as we dive into the relational aspect of the Enneagram, like, I imagine that's like a big deal when you talk about belonging and you feel like mattering to somebody. Like, that's obviously a big chunk of your identity and who you are. And so that would be very vital to, for the people that are on your inner circle to be aware of that in your life. And so that's something that I'm sure has huge appeal to lots of people listening, not just the 2's, but especially as I know the 2's to be inherently relational people and others focused. Like, having that aspect of yourself to be known is a big deal. A couple comments, and we'll move to how to love a 1, or how to love a 2 rather. Someone said this: all this loving, giving, serving, and encouraging other guys can be exhausting. I sometimes find myself in need of rest and recreation. When I am secure in love, I can relax when I need to, and just appreciate the inner and outer beauty of the people around me and of God's creation. That was beautiful. Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone else said this, my seasons of security are freaking awesome. Yes, he said freaking. It looks like being in the Word every morning, reading a growth-focused book, taking a walk whenever I desire, and saying no thank you to the requests of others when necessary, without being nervous that they'll think less of me, or worse, become unloving. In these seasons, I'm extremely confident in not only who I am, but also who I was and who I'm becoming. I don't fear others learning about my past mistakes because I'm focused forward, remaining confident in my current friendships while serving new ones with much heart and soul. It also means being open about my sexuality, what I've learned from it, and who Christ is calling me to be through it. Just writing about these moments of balance has brought a huge smile to my face, which encourages me because by him taking the time to give feedback, it was a very two-ish thing to do, thinking about the community and thinking about this episode, but it also helped him stop and it was like a journal entry. I got the vibe where he was able to do all of this self-processing and that it blessed him to do that. So that made me smile because that was, again, such a two comment. So
you go, girl. That's all I gotta say to that.
You go, Glenn Coco.
You are embodying the state of being that I am striving for right now. So I am looking up to you, fellow Yobber. Thank you.
Yeah. I know it's easier said than done whenever we talk about growth and security, just do this and you'll be happy and secure. That is a journey, of course, but it's beautiful when you get to experience that and when you get to grow as these twos have shared. So thank you to all the twos who have shared. If you have a two in your life, for anyone listening, if you are a two, if you know a two, if you're in our community, you certainly know a two. You have, unless you're living under a rock, and even then there's probably a two under there. So watch out. Watch out. Under the rock, there's a two. But here's what you do if you love a two. And so Wes, you can chime in if any of these sound particularly appealing in your life, or if you can think of any others of ways that we can love you. If you love a two, remind them to use their thought life to guide them into a time of quiet each morning so they can prioritize their day with what is truly needed versus what seems to be needed. Remind them not to let their feelings be their only guide as they invite these thoughts in, and encourage them to take care of themselves, including mental and physical self-care. Remind them to revisit the past for cues and look to the future for their plans. Make active plans and learn from the past and let go more instead of manipulating. Remember that twos feel that in order to receive love, they must be giving. It isn't out of cruelty, but a desire to genuinely find love. Encourage your two and their chosen love language, not just yours, and try to help them feel safe by regularly assuring them that they are the most special person in your heart, especially if you happen to be someone who does not show it outwardly all the time.
Wow. I feel so loved just from you reading that. Yes. The only thing I could add to that, because it was so good. Don't assume that we are okay. Don't assume that we're in a healthy headspace just because that we took the time to come be around you. And don't assume that we are too busy either, for you to do something special for us. We will always gladly open up with you if you ask us about our mental health or physical health or, and just, if it looks like we're just too busy doing our own thing, trust us, we're not. We're just filling our lives with work to try to seem meaningful. Okay. Reach out to us, make sure that we're actually doing okay, that we're in a good, healthy headspace.
I imagine, especially since, this conversation's, in our YOB community, and a lot of men in our community love words of affirmation, love physical touch. It goes back to that comment at the beginning where someone just swells in love when someone says, I love you, or gives you a nice hug. If you're not normally someone who projects, if you're somebody that keeps those feelings inside, you don't say the words, I love you often, or you don't hug people, or you don't whatever, which I know that's got to be a rare breed in our community. There's some people who aren't into hugs, and that's totally fine. This isn't a shaming tactic, but I would say for a twos, if you have a two in your life, I think particularly for twos in our community, that is a very meaningful and a simple gesture of just obviously not lying, saying I love you if you mean it. And then, whether it's a hug or a shoulder tap or whatever the physical touch looks like I think that's just a very simple gesture to outwardly reaffirm the two in your life, that you're there and that you care.
Without sounding too creepy, please touch me.
Please touch me. I'm always on the search for titles of the episodes, Wes. That could be the title of the episode. We'll see. Well, I have lots of options from all the food metaphors and grease fires and all the things that you put out there. So I have my pick of title options. Wes, this was great. Thank you for coming on, for sharing some of your heart, sharing some stories, and for all the yobbers, gave some incredible feedback. I didn't get to read them all, but it was just really beautiful to get a snapshot of all the twos in our community, because there's so many of y'all. And you're so much of the lifeblood of this community. We would be nothing without the twos. Our numbers would literally be dwindled so severely. But beyond the numbers, you provide so much, whether it's someone who will wipe down chairs at a retreat or come onto a podcast for the first time, or just all the help and all the love that you give to our community. I'm grateful. So thank you, Wes.
You're too kind, and I cannot tell you what you and this group has come to mean to me. I can't imagine my life where I would be right now if I hadn't found y'all. And it just means the world to me that y'all would want to be a part of my life and allow me to be a part of yours. So I am a better person for it, and I hope that y'all can grow from me somehow as well.
I'm certain they will. Yeah. Thank you for just being so bold and so real to come on. And we're all blessing one another. So I'm glad that we could be there for you, and you're certainly there for us. So thank you. Thank you, Wes. It's really exciting to transition, because next week, everybody, we're going from maybe the most frequent type in our community to possibly the least frequent type, the Enneagram 3, the achiever. So it'll be really fun, because there's not many people to choose from in our community. And this was one of the more stressful episodes to plan, of wondering, gosh, is there a 3? Am I going to have to search high and low for a 3? But thankfully I was able to find one, and I'm excited for this conversation next week with the 3 in our community. It's not a large portion of our community, but they're people too. And I'm excited to learn. I'm excited to learn from the 3, the other extreme of our community, but staying in the heart triad. So I'm really excited to see what manifests in that regard. So stay tuned for that. Wes, this was lovely. Have a lovely rest of your night from, what was it? The beautiful mountain?
The beautiful mountain of Texas. That's flat as can be.
The beautiful mountain of Texas. Go treat yourself to a nice meal or a nice dessert or something. You did a good job on this episode. And until we cast our next convo, our next Enneagram convo, see y'all next time.
Bye.